Welcome to our community broadcasting network featuring the Health and Wellness Best Practices podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Streeter. Today's program will feature the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition. Started at the advent of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, the CCDC is Colorado's premier disability rights advocacy organization. They advocate for those with all types of disabilities to live full, equitable lives with equal access to any civic, professional, and/or personal opportunities that are available to people without disabilities. Visiting with us is Julie Riskin, the co-executive director of the organization. Julie, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't you start out by giving us a little history of the organization, background, and kind of where you are today?
Sure. So the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition is going to be 35 in a couple months. We celebrate our birthday with the Americans with Disabilities Act, so July 26th will be 35 years. We actually started a little bit before that as a project of the Community Resource Center. But that's about how old we are. We're a membership organization. Membership is free to anyone who wants to join. You can join at our website very, very easily. And we've got over 5,000 members in Colorado. Our mission is to build power and influence of the disability community for the purpose of advocating for social justice, which is we understand very broad. And then we narrow it down and focus on the issues that are most important to people with disabilities. And we use what's called integrated advocacy, which is we take all the different advocacy tools and then blend them to meet the moment and to meet whatever the issue is. So that would be litigation, lobbying, grassroots organizing, communications, education. We do a lot of administrative advocacy, meaning we work a lot with state agencies and rules. So we kind of take all of those things together and figure out what's the best way to resolve any particular issue. We were started, again, around the time that the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed because people wanted to make sure that that became the reality in Colorado. And after the organization had been around a couple of years, the organization was hired by the Colorado Developmental Disabilities Council to do healthcare hearings around the state, to organize them. Now, I always say this was 3 or 4 or 5 healthcare reforms ago. This was in the early 90s. And so we went around, and I say we, I wasn't even here yet, but the organization went around the state and held pretty impressive, particularly for a new organization in those days, hearings where they had, local organizing committees. But we learned a couple things in doing that. Number one thing that we learned is that healthcare, because of everything that is in healthcare, particularly Medicaid, is the number one issue for people with disabilities, because everything that we need to stay alive and to focus is paid for under Medicaid. So it might not always be health, like it's not always like going to the doctor, but it's things like help in your home, transportation. A lot of those things are covered under Medicaid. So that's the number one issue. Two, the second thing we learned is that Colorado is a very big state, and we can't just sit in Denver and think we know everything. We've got to be out there. We've got to have people in different parts of the state to really represent the broadness of our state. We also learned that a lot of healthcare happens at the state level, and so we've got to be involved in the state legislature, and that really started our legislative advocacy. And we actually sued the General Assembly because when we started advocating, it was so inaccessible, we couldn't really do anything there. And so the state General Assembly at that time, and I'm happy to say it is a very different place now, pretty much said, well, we don't want you anyway, or we don't want to deal with this. And so the organization sued the entire General Assembly and won. To get a lot of ADA accommodations in the legislative process. So we started, so we sued them. We were able to be active. We got involved. We passed some legislation. We stopped other legislation. And then we realized we've really got to work at the state agencies on rules because passing a bill is just one tiny little piece. So we started getting involved with that. And then by doing all of this work on Medicaid, we developed a lot of expertise. So then people started calling us with Medicaid problems. So we then started helping people with that and finally kind of created a program where we do this kind of advocacy using both attorneys and non-attorneys, but mostly it's been non-attorneys.
Now, Medicaid is a big part of what helps people with disabilities, isn't it?
Yeah, Medicaid is a huge part of what helps people with disabilities. It is the lifeline for many. The reason Medicaid is such a lifeline is it is the only funder of long-term care, like long-term care. Even the long-term care insurance is usually only good for a couple years. So for people with lifelong disabilities, Medicaid is really the only option. The private insurance often doesn't cover the things that we need in a way that we need them. So even if everyone had a job that offered insurance, that still wouldn't do much for us.
Why don't you explain what the term cross disability means? Because that's a little different.
Thank you. Yes. In the 80s, when we were formed, people knew what that meant, but no one does anymore. And what cross disability means is a philosophy. And what it means is that we believe that people with different types of disabilities have more in common than not, and that we do better working together. That doesn't negate the need for single disability organizations, and we work closely with many of them. For example, we have a great relationship with the National Federation of the Blind. We work with the Colorado Association of the Deaf. We work with Mental Health Colorado. We work with a lot of organizations that focus on one disability, but we believe that for a lot of the systemic things that we all need, it really blends together. So, for example, transportation is something that a lot of people with disabilities need. Now, someone in a wheelchair and someone who's blind but walks might need different forms, but we all need to be able to get around. We all need communication access. That's going to look different for someone who's deaf than for someone who might have other needs.
All right. Now, it's kind of an interesting organization in as much as it is disability led. Do you want to
Yeah.
explain that?
Yes, thank you. So we are led by people with disabilities, and what that means is that all of our staff, the vast majority of our staff and more than 50% of our board have people with disabilities or are immediate, like family members or guardians of someone with a disability. But most of us have disabilities. Both myself and the other co-director of our organization have disabilities. Most of our staff, more than 90% of our staff, we all have disabilities, and they're all different types of disabilities. So that's what we mean by we're disability led. We take our direction, we have a board of directors, but the board of directors kind of broadly oversees. We hear from our members, and that's how we decide what's important is by what we hear from our members. And that's both by people who call, email, get in touch, but also what we hear when we're out in the community talking to people. We deliberately go to different places. We don't just sit in Denver and say, come to us, but it's what we hear in the community. And even more broadly is, over the past 5 years, like everyone else, we've done more and more online stuff, virtual stuff. So even what we hear when people, when we put out offerings and we see what is really drawing people to our offerings, what people are really interested in, that
Okay.
all of that informs how we choose the issues. And of course, we also choose issues that it's something we can do something about as a state organization. So,
Right. Well, again, it just makes an awful lot of sense when you, as an organization, have people that can really identify the issues working with you and for you. that's that's something that is invaluable.
Yeah, there's a couple other points to that. So one, like the people that help with Medicaid, that help when someone like loses their Medicaid or has a problem, and people call and they're very upset, and sometimes they're very, like kind of angry with the world because these systems just can really make you feel that way. And so everyone who's talking to them has been through it themselves. So like we know what it feels like. So that helps build that alliance but then also because we understand the system, we can also explain to professionals, here's why people are upset because they might not always understand. The other thing that's been really interesting is when we have people with disabilities in positions of power, they are then in those rooms and they can help explain to all the other people in those rooms our perspective. And that's really, really important.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, and that also aids in the policy development.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, often people come up with an idea, but they don't deal with it on the ground. So we can often come in and say, okay, we understand this idea and it's a good idea, but here's the issue on the ground.
Right,
And then
right.
we can say, like, here might be a better way to implement this, or here's
Mhm.
what, this one thing is going to be a problem for this population.
Yeah, and again, you use a statement: policy involvement is possible for everyone, and
Yes.
that in itself is powerful.
Yes, recently I was talking to someone who said that they didn't see themselves as someone that would have a place at a policy table before being involved, and then realized like, no, everyone has to be at the policy table. And someone else said recently, if they don't, well, something like if they don't offer me a chair, I'm going to pull up my own and sit down anyway because we all have a right to have a say, and I really feel that leaders in the disability community have an obligation to make sure that we're at the table and that we also not just barge in ourselves, but then we open the door for other people who are coming behind us and support, our next generation and other people with disabilities, because it should never just be one perspective or one or two perspectives, but really making sure that, again, we are kind of always evolving, always listening, always opening doors and bringing in new members of the community so that that policy table continues to grow.
Right, right. Again, the social justice aspect is really important for your organization as well. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. You can, it's really kind of a holistic, comprehensive thing. So, you can make a building accessible, great. That's important. But if you don't have a wheelchair to get out of your house, or there isn't a bus or a transportation, or you don't have the opportunity to have a job, all of those things have to come together. And the other thing is that discrimination also multiplies. So there's discrimination exists against anyone with a disability. It's out there. And the ADA has only been around for 35 years. If you compare that to the Civil Rights Act, that's been around more than twice as long or twice as long. Um, I don't think anyone would say we've solved racism in our country. So if you add, disability plus race plus poverty plus, other identities such as being rural, all of those things can multiply. So that's why that social justice aspect is important, that we have to look at the intersectionality of everything and how that all fits. And so when we're looking at what policies do we need to look at all of that, all of those issues.
Okay, Julie. Excellent information. Do you have any final thoughts for us today?
Well, the final thoughts is that anyone can be involved. You can join as a member at our website and join for free as a member. You'll then get information about our events, our trainings. We're going to be doing a whole community engagement series starting in June on building up for making sure that people can be involved as they want with the 2026 election. We are nonpartisan, so we give people information. So we definitely would encourage people to get involved. We also have on our website a Save Medicaid Toolkit. There's a lot of stuff going on right now. As we speak, we have people in DC. We've had people on national calls to try and educate our congressional representatives about disability and about the dire consequences that would happen if there are any kind of Medicaid cuts. So we have a whole toolkit there so that people can do whatever action they're comfortable with. But that's something that affects everyone. There's no one who is not affected by Medicaid, whether you're disabled or not. If you are living in Colorado and you want healthcare to be available, whether or not you're on Medicaid, you need that Medicaid infrastructure because that's what keeps healthcare alive in our state.
Julie, well, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us and
Thank you.
explain some of the issues. And I hope you come back again and we talk again in more depth about some of the things that are going on that you're working on in the future.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
For more information about the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, visit www.ccdconline.org.